Hey there nation, welcome to the show where we help you to play miniatures wargaming on a budget. It is I, Commander Cheapskate, and we are back with another episode of Cheap Shots. This series is dedicated to show you guys how to save money on the miniatures wargaming hobby, and on this episode number 53, we're going to show you guys how to quickly and cheaply paint up some House Van Saar Archeoteks and Neoteks for Necromunda. As you can see here, this is the end result of what your miniatures are looking like. We're doing a kind of like a Synthwave inspired paint job on these miniatures with lots of purples and magentas and pinks and things of that nature. So because of that, we're going to paint up that really quickly and show you guys how to save a ton of money on this one. Now, assuming that you're purchasing everything for the very first time, we're talking about a grand total investment of $41.73 to paint this up using the Cheapskate method. And when you compare that price point to buying actual products by Citadel as well as Army Painter to do exactly the same thing, we're talking about a grand total savings of $136.67. So let's go ahead and get this video started and talk about how you guys can quickly, as well as more importantly, cheaply paint up some Van Saar Archeoteks and Neoteks. Alright, so first of all, the first thing you do, of course, is to prime your miniatures. In this case, I suggest that you use black primer. We use Rust-Oleum flat black primer, runs you $3.99 at your local Walmart. I just did a quick once over on all the miniatures I was planning on painting up in this Synthwave inspired style. Now, when it comes to priming, there's a reason why you want to do priming is for two reasons. The first reason why is because it gives it a good texture for your acrylic paints to adhere to. If you were just to paint your miniatures with just bare plastic, it would ruin your finish because a lot of the acrylic would just slide right off the miniature. So by priming your miniature, it gives it a good base coat and a texture for your acrylics to stick to and to adhere to. Now, the second reason why you also want to do a primer, in this case using a black primer, is because the undercoat that you use to prime your miniature will usually have a end result on the vibrancy of the colors that you use. Traditionally speaking, the darker the primer, the more muted your colors will be, and the brighter the primer, the more vibrant your colors will become. And since we're doing a Synthwave inspired design with this kind of shadowy glowing effect going on in our miniatures, I'm going with a solid black primer. So once you prime all your miniatures in black, the next thing you do, of course, is to take your miniatures and to do some spray painting. Alright, so these miniatures have been taken out to my garage, and the reason why is because I'll be using spray paints primarily in order to give this kind of glowing synthwave kind of look for these miniatures as well. My buddy Warlord Ace was inspired by 1980s synthwave style music, and a lot of synthwave stuff. There's a lot of darker greens, dark blues, a lot of vibrant yellows, oranges, and pinks, like this neon kind of glow for it. And so that's the look you wanted to go for these guys, kind of like a 1980s inspired Van Saar gang. And so the base color we decided to do is use Hunter Green. It's made by Krylon. Got this at my local Walmart for $4.99. And what I did is I just painted over the entirety of the miniature with this spray paint is all I did, just a quick once over all the colors. Now, traditionally, whenever you do a spray paint like this on your miniatures, unfortunately, there are some parts that you will miss on your miniatures. Things like the recesses, the armpits beneath the miniature, that sort of thing. Well, because we're doing a Synthwave kind of zenithal highlighting type of paint technique with this miniatures, we really don't need to be too neat with our base spraying on this one because we spray painted the miniatures in black originally. Whatever we don't hit with the green, it's going to look like it's part of the shadowing is what it's going to look like. So if you don't cover the entirety of the miniature with 700 green, do not stress out. It just adds to the overall effect. Alright, so like I said before, we are doing a Synthwave inspired paint design, so because that, we're going to use a lot of zenithal highlighting on these miniatures. So the first thing I suggest that you do is you spray the left-hand side of the miniature, left-hand side as you're looking with the miniature, using some Rust-Oleum deep teal, runs you $3.99 at your local Walmart. All that is, I just a quick little burst of this color from the top left-hand corner, spraying down at a 45-degree angle, so that way you catch the left-hand side of the miniatures. And the reason why is because this deep teal color kind of acts as kind of like a little bit of a highlight, so that way it looks like the green has like this glowing effect taking place on the left hand side of the body, and that's the reason why I painted it that way. So just a quick little burst at a 45-degree angle at the left hand side of the miniatures, and just do that real quick for your miniatures real fast. Alright, the next step is to do another zenithal highlighting, but this time we're spraying primarily vertically, right above the miniature, spraying down. And the color we use for this is Silver Lilac. It's made by Rust-Oleum Paint. I got my local Walmart for about $3.99. And the reason why we're doing this is because you want to create this effect that looks like that these guys are walking through the hives of the underhive, through the shoots of the underhive, like they have like this neon glow taking place on them. So because of that, you want to create this multi-directional kind of reflective look with the different colors that you're having on the miniature. So because of that, I use Silver Lilac because because it's kind of like a muted purplish color that's kind of white, so it kind of gives like this effect, this glowing effect. So by spraying from the 12 o'clock position straight above down onto the miniature, what this does is it primarily focuses the paint on the top of the heads, as well as the shoulders, as well as the chest. It might hit the bases a little bit, as well as some of the details on the arms and legs. That's perfectly fine. But once we add our final highlighting color, which is a bright magenta, it's going to interact with this silver lilac and create this really cool glowing effect using that pink paint. And that's the reason why we do it from the 12 o'clock position. So once you do your zenithal highlighting with this silver lilac color, we're going to do our very last burst of color with spray paints. Alright, and so the very last zenithal highline that we're using is Magenta by Rust-Oleum. It's a satin finished paint. Got this in my local Walmart for $3.99. And as you can see, this is where it all kind of comes together now. So now all the zenithal highline that we did previously with the teal as well as the silver lilac, now it's coming to full fruition with this magenta color. So we're going with this bright neon pink color, and that's because you see a lot of neon pink and a lot of synthwave music, a lot of cyberpunk images, and just in city streets in particular, you see a lot of pink neon lighting. And so that's the color we kind of went with these guys on this one. So all I did is I just took the can and I pointed it up at a 45-degree angle, spraying downward at a 45-degree angle from the right-hand side of the miniature. Now what this does is it focuses most of the color on the right-hand side of the body of the miniatures, but at the same time also catches the top of the head as well as the shoulders, across the chest, a little bit on the legs as well. And what you can see, that deeper teal color and green color is still in the recesses with the black, creating those nice vibrant shadows. At the same time, that silver lilac that we sprayed earlier interacts very nicely with the magenta color and gives us this kind of like glowing, radiating effect on the miniatures as well. And once you're done with that magenta color doing that zenithal highlighting, you're pretty much done for a majority of the work on these miniatures. Alright, so this is what the end result of all that base spraying looks like. So as you can see here, we've taken these miniatures, we put them directly onto the top of my painting station with some really good lighting on it, and you can see these guys have like this glowing purplish look going on for these guys. They look very, very cyberpunky, and that was the kind of the end result we were looking for when we did this zenithal highlighting with these guys. Now, if you technically wanted to, you could actually just glue these guys, especially the Neoteks. You could just take them off the little bases that I put them on so that way I get base spray. You can glue them directly onto your bases, onto the little Grav-Cutters they have, and you can call it a day. You could, if you really wanted to, this could be the furthest you could take your painting if you really wanted to. For us though, it was a little bit too monochromatic for my liking, and so because I decided to add some accent colors with the metallics as well as some neon greens that I wanted to put on these guys, so because of that, we're going to take this additional step further and go beyond that. Alright, so the very first thing we need to work on are the metallics. So like I said, a majority of the painting on these miniatures are pretty much done for the most part. However, my friend Warlord Ace wanted to have like this kind of T800 Terminator look with these Van Saar guys. So because that, we did a slight conversion with this kit where we replaced all the heads of the Van Saar miniatures with Citadel skulls instead. And the reason why I did that is so that way they have like this Terminator Eversor assassin like vibe going on with these Van Saar gangers. So because of that, what we did is we just picked out all the metallics in silver. So things like on the Grav-Cutters, they got like these little hood scoops in the front of the Grav-Cutter. They also have like these little gas pedals in the back there. We picked those out in 2 thin layers of anniversary silver. At the same time, we also picked out the skulls that we had for these guys, as well as the barrels of their guns, as well as the shaft of their weapons. Also the energy shields that these Neoteks carry, we also picked those out in 2 thin layers of anniversary silver. Anniversary silver can be bought at your local Hobby Lobby for 75 cents. It's a bright, vibrant silver color, and it contrasts very nicely with the synthwave paint job that we've done on these guys. In fact, they look like Terminators from the 1980s movies, and they look absolutely fantastic. So once you're done with that silver motif, the next thing to do now is move on to the gold. Alright, so now we're going with our base coat for all the golds. In this case, we're going on the skull, spider skull, Van Saar emblems on the energy shields. We're also picking up the knee pads and elbow pads for both our Archeoteks and Neoteks as well. The Archeoteks have these kind of cool looking chest rigs where they have like this like scale armor that runs down the length of their chest. We picked those out in some details as well. Same thing with the dials and the weapons of the rad beamer, as well as the spider rig that they're wearing as well. Picked those out in 2 thin layers of gold as well. Now on the Grav-Cutters, we decided to highlight the parts of the Grav-Cutters. They have like these like bulbs in the front as well as the sides of these arms of the Grav-Cutters. Put those on 2 thin layers of pure gold as well. Now pure gold is a nice vibrant gold color. It's made by Folk Art. You can pick it up at your local Hobby Lobby for about 75 cents, and we put 2 thin layers on it as well. Also forgot to mention, on the back of the Grav-Cutters, there's these 3 little fin like looking things that are on the back of them. We also decided to pick those out as well. Now this photo here is also kind of nice too, because it kind of shows you the effect of the zenithal highlighting that we did earlier had on the miniatures. If you look look at these Neoteks, I'm laying them on their backs, but if you look on the bellies of them, you can see that darker purple color and black and green color with a little bit of the magenta, it creates that nice little shadowy effect on the underbellies of these guys. So it looks really, really cool with that glowing magenta effect going on in them as well. And once you basically do that, the next thing you do now is an oil wash for the energy shields. So the next step we're going to work on real quick is to do a base coating on the miniature, as well as doing some oil washing and on the energy shields. And I forgot to take some photos of this step, so I'm going to kind of talk a little bit about what I did. The first thing we need to do, first of all, I need to add some mid-wax poly shade mission oak color as an oil wash for the hubcaps of these energy shields, where the emblem is for all the metallics. I just need to put a little bit of oil wash on there. It does exactly the same thing as Army Painter Strong Tone, except that Army Painter Strong Tone costs you $32 per can, while the poly shade acrylics will just run you about $7 per can, so the savings are well worth it. Now, once you let that stuff dry and cure after 24 hours, what you need to do then is put 2 thin base coats of pale gray on the actual energy shield itself, and cover over the little bit of the oil wash on there. And the reason why is because we're going to do some glazing on those energy shields to give this nice kind of glowing pink effect, but that will come in later on. Now, while those energy shields are being taken care of, the next thing you need to do, of course, now is start focusing on some of the detailed pieces of these miniatures. So Van Saars wear these kind of interesting biosuits that they have. At the same time, these biosuits have a lot of tubing that runs across them, primarily along the rib cages, as well as from the upper back to the chest. They got these tubes that run all over the entirety of the miniatures. We decided to pick out those details in some lime sherbet by Apple Barrel Paint. Runs at 50 cents at your local Walmart. Just put 2 thin layers on all those tubings to give like this kind of glowing green effect. At the same time, we also picked out some details like the eye sockets of each of the skulls, put a little dot of lime sherbet there to give this kind of glowing green effect going on from the eye sockets. Same thing with some of the dials. These guys kind of wear these little biomonitor type of devices on them, so you just put little dots of green on there just to kind of pick out those details. Now on the Grav-Cutters, the Grav-Cutters actually are kind of neat. They have like these tubes that run from the engine block in the back to the actual board that the rider rides on. As you can see there, I just picked those out in 2 thin layers of lime sherbet as well to give that kind of green color going on for the Grav-Cutters. And that pretty much does it right there for these miniatures. These miniatures are actually really quick to paint once you do that zenithal highlighting for these guys. So the next step, of course, is to glue your Neoteks onto the top of the Grav-Cutters real quick. And after you let that glue and dry, the next thing you do, of course, is an oil wash. This is a quick paint method, like I said before, so we're going to wash all these miniatures in a single color, which is mid-wax poly shades acrylic. It's made in mission oak color. And the reason why we're using this is because it's a combination of stain as well as a polyurethane as well. It does exactly the same thing that Army Painter Strong Tone does, except like I said before, Army Painter Strong Tone runs at $32 a can, while mid-wax poly shades run you $7 at your local Walmart. So all you need to do is just take your poly shades from mid-wax and just do an all-over wash for the Grav-Cutters, the riders, the Neoteks, as well as your Archeoteks. The poly shade will then work its way into the recesses of the miniature, bring out a lot of the detail. It also smooths over the transitions that we had from our zenithal highlighting on our miniatures as well. Also mutes down the brightness of the miniatures too, and it kind of mutes the color down a little bit, so that we got this kind of nice finish. Now what you'll need to do is wait 24 hours for this stuff to dry and cure. It is a stained with polyurethane, which means you'll have a nice hard coating on the outside of your miniature, and it basically seals it and keeps it protected. So you need to wait 24 hours. And the reason why you need to wait 24 hours is because if you mess with your miniature while it's still drying, you could ruin the finish of your miniatures. So for me, for example, what I like to paint in the evenings. So what I do is I'll do all my painting for that evening, and the last step I'll do is I'll do a poly shade with the mid-wax, and then the next day when I go back to painting again, they'll be dried and cured, and I can move on from there. And while you're letting this stuff to dry and cure, my suggestion to you is to work on the shields, the energy shields that these guys carry, while this stuff is drying. Alright, so next we're going to move on to the energy shields. Now for the energy shields, because we're going with this synthwave kind of design, instead of painting the energy shields green or blue like you see a lot in Van Saar miniatures, we decided to paint these guys up with like a glowing reddish pink color, so that way that magenta glow that you saw earlier on the miniatures, it kind of explains where that magenta glow is coming from. Now to do that process, we're going to use a technique that's called glazing. Now typically when you do glazing, all you need to do is you just paint the part that you want to have that glowing effect. You base coat in either pale gray like I did using folk art, or you can use white. It's up to you. I use pale gray just because that's the color I had on hand. Now what you need to do is you need to take the color that you want to glow as. In this case I'm going to use magenta by Americana Deco Art. It runs you about 65 cents at your local Hobby Lobby. I'm going to use that color. What you do is you mix your paint with clean water and you mix it together until it's about the consistency of milk, and then what you do is you apply it like a wash all over the white undercoat of the energy shields. And when it dries, you put another layer on top of it, let it dry, and then add another layer on top of that. What it does, it kind of creates this kind of glowing effect, and that's how you basically do it with glazing. The only problem with glazing your miniature is that it is kind of time consuming, not in the sense that because it's very difficult to do, It's just that you have to wait for the layers of glaze to dry first and then move on. So it does take a while just because you're waiting for that stuff to dry, but it's well worth the effort. So in this case, I put 4 coats is what I decided to do with my glaze. So put on a 1 coat, let it dry, then a 2nd coat, dry, 3rd coat, dry, 4th coat, dry, and this is what it looks like as well. Now, if you'll notice, the finish is kind of streaky looking, and that's perfectly fine. Right, that's going to be perfectly fine. The reason why is because the next step is a dry brush. Alright, so we're going to dry brush our energy shields now with the magenta that we just did with the magenta glazing. We're using Cameo Pink by Apple Barrel Paint. It runs you 50 cents at your local Walmart. It's kind of like this nice cotton candy kind of color to it. And what we're going to do is just to go quick, simple dry brush over all the magenta that we just did with the glazing earlier. Now, the reason why we're doing that is because, as you can see in these energy shields, there's these tendrils of energy that kind of erupt from the hilt of these energy shields, and by doing the dry brushing we capture those details, but at the same time leave that glaze that we did earlier into the deeper recesses of the miniature as well. And the reason why I want to do that is because this brighter color will show through when we do our 2nd layer of glazing, and that's the next step next. So once you're done with dry brushing, we're going to do another set of glazing once again. Exactly the same technique that we did before. We take our magenta color, mix it with water to the consistency of milk, and we just apply it like a wash all over the dry brushing. Now, you don't need to put as many layers of this glaze as you did the first time around. The first time I did was 4 different layers. This time I just did 2 layers. So as you can see here, we got this kind of glowing, radiating pink neon effect coming off those energy shields, and it looks really, really awesome as well. And now that we're done with that, we're going to do exactly the same thing now with the stems that are coming off of these Van Saar Grav-Cutters. So what I decided to do is do another glaze once again. I painted those up with pale gray for the little stems that are beneath the hoverboards that they're running on. And then of course, once again, I put another glaze of magenta on those as well. I put 4 layers of glaze on this as well. And as you can see, it just kind of had like this neat little glowing effect. But I wanted the stems have a different color on that, so I decided to take it to another step by adding another glaze on top of that. Alright, so one more time, I decided to do another glaze, but this time I used yellow glaze is what I decided to do. So once again, same exact step, just take your yellow paint, mix it with milk to this, mix it with water, so that way it's the consistency of milk, and then once again, you just throw that on top of your, on the magenta glaze that you did earlier on the stems as well. In this case, I put 3 layers of yellow on there as well. It creates this kind of like burnish, glowing, yellowish, reddish, jet wash type of look on these Grav-Cutters. Looks very vibrant. It contrasts very nicely with the purple paint job that we did on these guys earlier, and so that's what you do for that step as well. So now that we're done with our miniatures being cured as well as being cured over with the oil wash, the next thing we do now is start working on the bases. In this case, I painted the entirety of the base in 2 thin layers of Anniversary Silver by Folk Art. Runs you 75 cents at your local Hobby Lobby, and it's a nice bright silver color. And the reason why we're doing this is because I want to create this glowing neon effect on the different vents and seams that are along the bases that you have there. Like I said before, we're going with like a Synthwave inspired paint job, so we want to make like there's like neon chemicals or neon lights erupting from the bases as well, and that's the next step we're going to be working on. Alright, so once again, we're going to put some neon pink glowing type accents on these bases. In this case, I use Bright Magenta by Apple Barrel Paint. It runs at 50 cents at your local local Walmart. And as you can see here, all the little vents, some of the seams, the lines and stuff, I just put 2 thin layers of that Bright Magenta onto the bases, so that way it looks like there's like this glowing neon effect on it as well. Now, if you're worried about making a mess, do not worry about it. And the reason why is because if it does spill out of the recesses of the miniature, don't worry. It just looks like it's glowing, so it looks like it's kind of cool anyway. So just put 2 thin layers of that and you're ready to move on to your next accent color. And the next accent color we're going to use is Tahiti Blue by Delta Ceramcoat. And once again, we're doing exactly the same thing we did earlier with the magenta, but this time we're using Tahiti Blue. So you have like these blue and pink neon lights coming out of the bases that kind of give like this 1980s synthwave, vaporwave look for the bases. So it looks really, really awesome as well. You can see the same thing taking place in the Van Saar up there in the upper right hand corner of the image as well, just because I worked on both groups at exactly the same time. Put 2 thin layers of that and you're ready to work on the rest of the bases. Now, I did do an oil wash and I did cure the bases. Unfortunately, I forgot to take a photo of it when I was working on it. But if you've seen how we do oil washes before, you pretty much get the same idea again. So all I did is I took the mid-wax poly shades again, but this time I thinned it down a lot. I put a lot of paint thinner with the poly shades, but to the consistency it was about the color of maple syrup. And the reason why I did that is because I wanted the poly shades to bring out the details of the recesses of the bases. But at the same time though, I didn't want that poly shade to drown drown out the magenta and the Tahitian blue that we put in the bases before. So that's why I did a really thinned out layer on it. And so because I just washed the entirety of the base real quick with that, let it dry, let it cure for 24 hours as well. Once you're done with that, you could spray these guys down with a matte varnish if you want to, and then to give it a matte finish to take away the sheen on the miniature. And when it's done, you just rim the bases real quick in 2 thin layers of Skyline. It's made by Folk Art. It's a nice stormy bluish gray color, and it looks really good on our Necromunda miniatures. We put this stuff on the rim of all of our Necromunda miniatures that we do for our campaign. And once you're done with that part, you are finished with these miniatures. Alright, and so here's the end result of the miniatures. As you can see, I spray painted these guys down real quick with some matte varnish spray to give the muted matted look to these guys and take off the sheen. I then glued on the energy shield onto our Neoteks, and as you can see there, they look absolutely fantastic with this cool Synthwave inspired look to these guys. They're bright, vibrant, and colorful, and they're ready to bring down wrath and ruin on the highways of Anarchy Road. So now that we showed you guys how to paint these guys up cheaply as well as quickly, what we're going to do now is show you exactly what you need to purchase from Citadel and Army Painter to paint exactly the same we did, and show you exactly the savings you would do it by doing the Cheapskate method. Alright, so this is the shopping list you need to purchase from both Citadel as well as Army Painter if you want to paint these up the same way we did earlier, but you want to use the name brand method. So first of all, you'll need to spray paint all these miniatures with Chaos Black Spray. Runs you $17 at your local Games Workshop. You'll then also need to do your space spraying, once again with our zenithal highlighting. You'll need to buy our airbrush, assuming that you have one, and you need to use these colors by Games Workshop Airline. First of all, you need to buy Caliban Green for the base coating. That runs you $7.80. You'll then need to do a zenithal highlighting of Sons of Horus Green. Runs you $7.80 for that color. You need to do another zenithal highlighting from the 12 o'clock position with Eidolon Purple Clear, which runs you $7.80 for that color. And then finally, you'll need to do another zenithal highlighting with Volupus Pink, runs you $7.80 for that as well. Now, for all the metallic details that you pick out in silver and gold, you need to use Ironbreaker as well as Retributor Armor. Both those products run you $7.80 as well. Now, for all the pale gray that we did the base coating on for the glowing effect for the stems of the Grav-Cutters as well as for the energy shields, you need to buy a pot of Ulthuan Gray. Runs you $4.55 for that one as well. Now, to do the oil washing, you'll need to buy a can of Army Painter Strong Tone, runs you $32 for that product. And then for the green details that we did on the weapons, as well as the tubing and things of that nature, as well, you need to purchase Vulcan Green and Sabrite Green and Militaran Green. All three of those will cost you $4.55 for those products. Now, for all the parts that you pick out in copper, you'll need to buy Screaming Bell, which is $7.80 for that. Now, for all the magenta painting that we did for the bases as well as for the energy shields, you'll need to paint those up in pink horror. You'll then need a dry brush with Emperor's Children. Both those run you $4.55. For the base work that we did for the pink and the blue neon on the bases, you'll need to buy Fulgrim Pink and Baharoth Blue. Both those run you $4.55 for those. Now, for the glazing that we did on the energy shields as well as the stems, you'll need to buy Averland Sunset as well as Screamer Pink. Those run you $4.55 for those. And to do the rim of the bases, you need to buy a pot of Rust Gray. Runs you $4.55 for that. And then you need to buy a can of Minotaurium Varnish to spray these guys down and give them a fat finish, and that runs at $19.50. Now, assuming you buy everything on this Citadel and Army Painter shopping list for the very first time, we're talking about a grand total investment of $178.40. Now, when you take that price and you subtract it from the Cheapskate method, which our method is $41.73, you're talking about a grand total savings of $136.67. So there you guys have it. That's how you guys can quickly as well as cheaply paint up some Van Saar Archeoteks and Neoteks. As always, please feel free to like, comment, and or subscribe. Your guys' input is valuable to us as always. Also check us out on Facebook, Instagram, as well as blogger.com for all the latest greatest hobby news related to our channel. That's good for this one, you guys. We'll catch you guys next one. Peace out and stay classy.